I think the story right now is what exactly happens with all of these tapes from inside the Packers facility, and what happens, what will be seen. Will there be the smoking gun of videotape as the smoking gun that cost, let's say, the Denver Broncos all of their quarterbacks before they played the New Orleans Saints last year, forcing Kendall Hinton to have to play? Will there be something? Will Aaron Rodgers over the last 30 days in the facility, will he have been an absolute angel about being masked everywhere and not violating any internal protocol? To me, that's going to be the big question. And if there were significant violations, the NFL has shown that they'll take money from teams over this. They've done it from the Raiders. They've done it from the Saints. They've done it from various teams. And so I think right now, the next part of this story, the story that I assume is happening with the football operations department in the NFL, in some room in New York, somebody is going over and just watching hours of this tape from inside the Packers facility, and we'll see what they find out from that over the next few days.
And, Peter, some would say that those past financial penalties were applied haphazardly, inconsistently, and unfairly when they decided to fine John Gruden and Sean Payton and Pete Carroll and Kyle Shanahan for not properly wearing their masks last year. There were plenty of other coaches that weren't properly wearing their masks or consistently wearing their masks. So the question that is ricocheting around the NFL right now is, what will the NFL do here to the Packers and to Rodgers, because there hasn't been consistency in the past. And they may have no choice but to do something now. But the broader question is, has the NFL been asleep at the switch when it comes to whether or not teams are enforcing the protocols internally, because the primary obligation falls to the teams? And that may be a mistake, because how can you trust the teams to mind the cookie jar? Do you really want to put the Packers in a situation where they have to hound Aaron Rodgers, a guy who was already thinking about retiring, already kind of wants out? Do you want to be pestering him to wear his mask all the time, fining him $15,000 every other day for a violation? No, the league should have been in charge of this from the get-go. But before we continue that conversation, let's hear from Matt LaFleur, the coach of the Packers, on this question of whether and to what extent Rodgers and the team has been following the COVID protocols within their building.
As far as the football space is concerned, I'm 100% confident.
Earlier you said you're 100% confident in following protocols inside the building. Can you explain why Aaron Rodgers would be allowed to be unmasked for those media availabilities?
That's not what I said. I said within our football space, meeting rooms, walk through everything we do in that area.
Are there different rules for media availability?
I don't pay attention to the media rules.
Media rules. There are no media rules. If you're in the building and you're not vaccinated, you got to be masked at all times. And the league doesn't want to answer this question, Peter. I mean, they're trying to keep their heads low and their mouths shut so they don't get drawn into a bigger controversy here. But the bottom line is, when you read the protocols, if you're unvaccinated in the building, you have to be wearing a mask at all times. There is no exception for meeting with reporters in the press room. So that's what I believe at the end of the day. We're going to find out that Rodgers wore his mask whenever no one from the outside was in a position to see him wearing a mask, and therefore wonder, is he not vaccinated? But when it was time to go into that media room, no mask in sight, to perpetuate the ruse that he was vaccinated. And you see how LaFleur is trying to wash his hands of it. You can't. It's still his building. It's still his team. And that's a room in that building. And the way the protocols are written, he should have had a mask on. And I think the way LaFleur tried to dance around it highlights the fact that they know he violated the protocol every time he went into that room without his mask on.
That's going to be the big question. The question is going to be, and Mike, you are anticipating that Aaron Rodgers for the last 30 days, because I believe that teams are required to keep the tapes of their meeting rooms for a 30-day period. So you are assuming that Aaron Rodgers in his locker room, when all the players are in there before they go out to practice, in his locker room and in the meeting rooms, had 100% compliance with the mask. I mean, personally,
I'm giving Matt LaFleur the benefit of the doubt. I'm giving Matt LaFleur the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's a liar too. But for now, I'm assuming he's telling the truth when he draws the line between football space, because he specifically said football space. And I would assume that he knows he can prove that before he takes that position. He knows he can't prove it in the media space, but he can. He better hope he can prove it in the football space, or he's as guilty as Rodgers of not telling us the truth.
Yeah, I guess I would just say this. Nobody thought that, and I'll go back to Denver last year. Nobody thought that the players were violating, any rules until the NFL got evidence that each one of the 4 quarterbacks in that room had put their Kinexon tracking device in the corners of the room and then sat together in violation of NFL COVID protocol together closer than they should have been in order to watch tape. And that, at least, is the story that the NFL tells. It's interesting. When I was at Broncos camp, I asked Drew Lock about it, and he goes, someday I'll tell you a very interesting story about that day. So my antennae went up, and I just have always thought, one of these days I'm going to find Drew Lock when he's a backup in Seattle or something, and I'm going to ask him that question to see what happened. But the one thing, Mike, I think that is important right now is that, let's just see what the tapes say. That's all. We know that he has appeared before the media unmasked. When the closest media member, he might argue, they might argue, and the NFL might give him a pass on, is 20 feet away from him. So maybe that happens. Who knows? But they cannot give him a pass on any time that he didn't have a mask on inside the building.
And as it relates to the media room, and this is where I believe the NFL should have a far greater obligation to enforce its protocols. I don't understand why the league requires the teams and expects the teams to enforce these protocols. As someone said to me yesterday, hey, the teams don't fine the coach when the coach goes to a press conference and criticizes the officials. The league does. The teams don't fine the players when they have uniform violations. The league does. Why in the world is the team responsible for hounding the players to comply when there's cameras everywhere and the league has the ability, may not have the capacity, frankly, may not be spending the money necessary when you got $64 million per year going to the owner's pincushion. You may not have the money in the budget to have somebody who reviews all those tapes proactively. But the bottom line is the NFL's been asleep at the switch for the stuff that we can see. Everybody sees these press conferences. We've seen Aaron Rodgers clips all year long, no mask. And they know he's not vaccinated. And they don't think something's amiss there. And, Peter, this is where the issue of inconsistency comes into play. Because we've seen press conferences of other unvaccinated players were not wearing masks in the building. And so it's not just Rodgers. I've seen images of Carson Wentz, of Kirk Cousins, people who we know aren't vaccinated, in the building doing a press conference without a mask. And Sims noted yesterday, we had a little clip of Kyler Murray doing a press conference, and he had a big-ass mask on his face, and I've never seen him wearing a mask doing a press conference all year long. So it could be teams are realizing that the league may have to wake up and do something about it. The question becomes, how much does the league do for fear of exposing itself for not doing anything before? And there are countless examples over the years of the league looking the other way on something that if it did hammer a team, the implication would be we were asleep at the switch and we have responsibility for this too. And we really aren't as zealous about our COVID protocols as we should be.
Look, when you talk about the prospect of what do you think the average NFL facility, how many cameras would have to be in that recording what goes on in those rooms? the equipment room, the trainer's room, every position coach's classroom, the locker room. And you can't just have one in the locker room. You'd have to have several. I mean, I cannot imagine. I can't imagine how long it's going to take NFL personnel to examine up to 30 days of videotape from inside the Green Bay facility. I mean, just imagine if you have, and I'm going to be conservative, if you have 15 cameras that you've got to examine, 15 Green Bay Packers cameras. And even if you only concentrate on, let's say, the offensive meeting room and the quarterback meeting room and the locker room, just to only look at Aaron Rodgers. I mean, that times 30. If you're going to look at one day and then multiply it times 30 or, minus their days off, I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of labor that it would take to stay on top of that for every team to find out if there's an unvaccinated, reserve guard. Not that a reserve guard would be unvaccinated, but a lesser player, to be able to watch him to see if he had his mask on every moment for the last 30 days.
Well, I agree with you, but it doesn't take as much legwork and effort and money to see Aaron Rodgers in the video posted at Packers.com of his most recent press conference with no mask, or Carson Wentz, or Kirk Cousins. And that's where the NFL has fallen down. Let me give you another example before we wrap on this, Peter, because the reason that I didn't pursue aggressively the tip that I got on October 5 that Aaron Rodgers isn't vaccinated was because the first thing I did, because I was familiar with the preseason protocols, I went back and looked at the games where he's not in uniform, and I looked for him to be wearing a mask. If he's wearing a mask at any of those preseason games, maybe he's not vaccinated. Well, preseason week 1 against the Houston Texans, no mask to be seen on Aaron Rodgers, who was clearly not in uniform. And then week 2 against the Jets, there was no mask to be seen on Aaron Rodgers, who was clearly not in uniform. And it continued through week 2 into week 3 at Buffalo. And in each of those preseason games, before the game began, the Packers issued a public list on their website of all the players who would not be playing and therefore not be in uniform. And the protocol says that everyone on the sideline who isn't vaccinated must wear a mask except for active players. So that's it. Case closed. Boom roasted. It's over. It's done. He violated protocol 3 times in the preseason to push the idea that he's vaccinated, the false notion that he's vaccinated. When I asked the league about it, they said, well, there's no distinction between active and inactive players in the preseason, so that doesn't apply. Are you freaking kidding me? Why have the word active player in the protocol if it applies to any player, whether or not they're in uniform? That's just baloney, and it gives you a glimpse of what they'll do to cover up their own incompetence, Peter, and the fact that they should have spotted it, that they should have found him, and that they should have pushed him to properly comply with the protocols and wear his mask. Hey, you don't want to be vaccinated? That's fine, but you got to wear the mask in the media room, on the sideline of the preseason games, but he didn't want to do it because he didn't want us to know he's not vaccinated.
The question is, at the time that those videos were taken, okay, when did the NFL issue its ruling against Aaron Rodgers that your homeopathic treatment and your homeopathic immunization, when did they tell him that that was not going to be allowed? Suppose they did that on Labor Day weekend. I have no idea when they did it. Apparently, they sent him a note at some point that said, your immunization does not qualify as a vaccination. So you must get vaccinated or you will be considered an unvaccinated player. That's the big question, Mike. He could easily argue that on those preseason weekends, including and not including the bye weekend, of course, because now there's a week between the third preseason game and the first regular season game. So was it in those, say, 17 days that he was told by the league that he was not vaccinated, if that's the case, he's going to have a very good argument that says, hey, listen, I was appealing this to the league. I considered that I was immunized/vaccinated. And so I think that is the word salad we'll get if that's how that goes.
And I don't buy that, Peter, because I can't imagine the league would say you can treat yourself as vaccinated until we tell you that we reject the idea that you made a home treatment out of ketchup and toothpaste that has increased your immunity. I can't imagine the league would say you can treat yourself as vaccinated. If the league truly gives a crap, and I almost said the other word, about COVID protocols and safety, I can't imagine the league would have said, oh, it's okay, you can go ahead and we'll pretend you're vaccinated until we decide that you aren't. I think the default would be, we'll take your request under advisement, but until we agree with you, you comply with the rules as someone who is unvaccinated. I'd be astounded if they gave him a pass and said you can behave as if you're vaccinated until we tell you you're not.
Maybe they didn't say that. Maybe Aaron Rodgers just said, while I'm appealing this, I am going to treat myself as vaccinated. Told Matt LaFleur the same thing, told the Packers the same thing. Look, I don't know. I'm sitting on the sidelines guessing like everybody else.
I'm fascinated by the conversation because, Peter, here's the thing. What are the Packers going to say to him when the delicate genius who decided 72 hours before the start of training camp that he was going to show up? I mean, they're scared of the guy. They're scared of him. Are they going to do anything to piss him off? When they know he's not vaccinated, but he believes he's immunized, and he's taking it up with the league, and I'm showing up at the game, and I'm not going to wear a mask, who in that organization is going to be the one to go to him and say, you got to wear the mask? Who in that organization is going to be the one that goes to him and says, you're paying a $15,000 fine? Given the broader context, nobody was doing that.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you, but the big question is, what Seinfeld episode was Delicate Genius actually used in?
It was the one where George went to the physical therapist who was Elaine's friend with the awful hairstyle, and they wanted her to know how bad her hairstyle was, so they thought if Kramer would see her, he would blurt out that your hair looks awful. And, of course, when they got Kramer and the woman together, Kramer said, I like your hairstyle. And then the woman wanted to date Kramer. But they never pulled that thread all the way through. We never knew if Wendy Malick, who played the friend with the bouffant hairdo in that episode, got together with Kramer. That's one of the great unanswered mysteries of the Seinfeld series.
But she was
Don't you wish you hadn't asked me that question? She was the delicate genius because George had to miss an appointment without 24 hours notice because he had to take his mother to the chiropodist. I have a problem. Yeah. I have a problem. I'll admit it.
A big.
Oh, I got a big one. All right.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.